Hey, welcome back to another video. This time I'm going to talk about the differences between logics and components and when you should use either and why it doesn't really matter in most cases. So this comes up in the questions and help section of the Discord periodically, and also when people talk to me in game, they say, is there a component for this? Or, should there be a component for this? And sometimes it's for things that are quite simple or questionable. For example, there's been a time where someone asked for a component that added two numbers together. And often I would just say, hey, use logics. And they say, well, isn't components better? And the answer isn't that either is better. The answer is to use what's most suitable for the scenario that you're doing. I'm going to show you a quick scenario in logics, which I would never suggest to do in components, and then show you what the resultant load to the world about that is. Not in terms of performance, but just in terms of sort of complexity, like components added and stuff like that. So I'm going to open to smooth POV here, and we're going to create a box. Create new box. Actually, we'll do a sphere, because that's a bit easier. So here's our sphere, and we're going to open that in the inspector, and we're going to pack it. Set it as the packing route, so that's where it'll go. And then we're going to grab the sphere mesh here and drag in an interface for it. And now we're going to go ahead and add together two numbers and set that as the radius of the sphere. So we're going to add 1 and 2 together, which is 3, and then we're going to bind that to the radius of the sphere. That's made the sphere quite big, so I'm going to just drop these numbers down a little bit. Should have thought with this ahead of time, but I didn't. That's no worries. Actually, we can just push the sphere out the way of our logics. Let's do that. There we go. So now we've got a really big sphere, and we're going to pack this logics into the sphere. Now, if you look, the sphere here has been driven on its radius to 3, and there is a bunch of slots underneath the sphere. There is the plus slot, which controls the addition of the two numbers as an input, and then a driver node, which just drives the value. And you'll see that these are all actually components. And that's the secret of logics, is basically it's components. The only difference is this visual part here. So you'll see here that these are just components and that they're just doing their job, not really changing. But the moment I unpack them, they have children in their slot hierarchy. And you'll see that the visual property is set to something. So if we expand the plus here, you'll see there's a visual. And if we go under the visual, what you'll see is a standard UIX setup. Now, I haven't done a tutorial on UIX, but don't worry about it too much. If I go to the text property here, I can set this to be potato. And you'll see now that, let me just deselect this, that the node is 1 plus 1, potato 2 is 3. And that our sphere is still 3. And so if I go ahead and pack this again, we're back to there being no visual components underneath this logics. So logics is just acting as components once you pack it. And that's really the secret there, is like there is no real difference. The times where you should use components over logics is when there is a component that will do the job for you faster. And I don't mean faster, well, I do mean it in terms of performance, but I also mean it in terms of just speed as well. So for example here, me adding those two numbers together and setting the radius of that sphere, super fast in logics. In components, that would probably actually be slower. But aligning a grid of these spheres in a nice, neat sort of grid structure, totally faster with components. I can add the object grid aligner, I'll put the tutorial in the video description for that one, and you'll get a nice grid of spheres. Or axis aligning them, video in the description, axis aligning them, super quick for component. So just think about the ease of use of your setup, and if there's a component available that can do the job faster, and then if not, just do logics. I've seen people wanting to not stuff together or do Boolean logic using components. Just use logics. There are components for it, and I do have tutorials for them. I'll put those in the video description if I've got them. I don't quite remember because there's quite a few. And you can use those if you want, but do remember that the logics components are there for you to use, and you can just go ahead and use them. I hope that makes sense, and I hope this answers the question about, is there a component for this, or is there a component for that, or is components better than logics? It really honestly doesn't matter, provided you're trying your best to be optimal wherever you can, and you're trying your best to have fun. Just have fun and keep building stuff. Thank you, I'll see you in the next one.